Okay, it looks like a lot of us are here, so we'll get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us for another Watershed Wednesday webinar. This is brought to you through the Watershed Institute, where our mission is to keep water clean, safe, and healthy. We work to protect and restore our water and natural environment in the central New Jersey area through conservation, advocacy, science, and education. We do this through scientific investigation and monitoring, advocacy for protection of water, extensive environmental education, and also modeling our best stewardship practices at the Watershed Center on our 950 acres of watershed reserve. So each webinar, we like to give an environmental justice and land acknowledgement. So we recognize that the land and water now under our care is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lenni Lenape. We pay respect to Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We respect their knowledge, culture, and tradition, which have contributed to the conservation of land and water. We also acknowledge that historic white supremacy and environmental racism practices have caused disproportionate environmental and climate impacts on people of color and overburdened communities. The Watershed Institute pledges to work for clean water and a healthy environment, including in communities that have been unjustly affected by systematic racism and environmental pollution. You can learn more about the Watershed Institute's values on our website. And we just wanted to let you know, if you enjoy this Watershed Wednesday, there's going to be another one in June, on June 15th at the same time as you are here now. That is going to be about 30 years of Streamwatch. Streamwatch being one of the Watershed's own community science based programs. It's been going on for 30 years. And over those 30 years, Streamwatch volunteers have been able to help gauge the health of our waterways through their water quality monitoring. In this webinar, you'll get to learn about the patterns and trends in that 30 years of data, and also how the data is turned into valuable information to support the watershed's education, advocacy, and conservation initiatives. And you can check this out at our calendar on our website. So now that the housekeeping is out of the way, I wanted to introduce you to our speaker tonight. Our speaker tonight is Alice Kratzer. She is an engineer, scientist, and entrepreneur, as well as the author of the new field guide, The Social Wasps of North America, which will be available for purchase in the Watershed Institute's Nature Center store very soon. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll answer them at the end of her presentation. We're so glad to have Chris with us here tonight, and without further ado, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. So let me just get the presentation set up here very quickly. All right, can you see this okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Excellent. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about wasps, how they affect our watersheds, and what we can learn from them. So, as Olivia said, my name is Alice Kratzer. I am an internationally acclaimed insect scientist and author of the book, The Social Wasps of North America, which was published earlier this year. I've spent the last 4 years researching and writing about social wasps, which are the ones that build like the big paper nests that many of you are probably very familiar with. In the context of entomology, social means that the wasps cooperate to take care of each other's young. This group is almost solely responsible for the bad reputation that wasps have, and includes all of the yellow jackets, hornets, and paper wasps that, statistically speaking, have probably bothered you at some point in your life. This book is the first of its kind and includes over 900 of my own full-color illustrations. Which begs the question, right? Why on earth would someone go so far out of their way to write a book about wasps? Ask anyone. Everyone knows that wasps are just the hateful cousins of bees that don't serve any purpose other than making our lives more difficult, right? Well, that struck me as odd, and it made me curious. Are wasps really the vile creatures that we make them out to be, or is there more to the story than meets the eye? Tonight, I hope to give you a glimpse into that hidden world of complexity and diversity right outside of our doorsteps, and show how it connects to our watersheds and to our daily lives. Then you can come to your own conclusions. To start us off, let's have a pop quiz. Which of the following photos shows a wasp? All right, so take your time and choose whichever of the following answers you think is best. This is not going to be graded, so you don't have to write it down. Okay, let's see if you were right. If you chose A, you are correct. If you chose B, you are correct. In fact, if you chose any of these, you are absolutely correct. It was a trick question. These are all photos of wasps. There are over 115,000 known species of wasps, with an estimated 200,000 undescribed species that are not yet known to science. Wasps are tied with beetles as the most diverse group of organisms on Earth. Wasps are unbelievably diverse. They occupy almost every terrestrial niche imaginable. For example, sawflies are simple herbivores with larvae that are easily mistaken for the caterpillars of moths and butterflies. They are a type of wasp. Spider wasps hunt spiders to feed their offspring. Jewel wasps raid the nests of other wasps for food. Gall wasps manipulate the cellular machinery of plants in order to create these protective houses that act as just protective coatings for their larvae. Some wasps make nests out of mud, and others make nests out of paper. Wasps that act as internal parasitoids are hyper-specialized to parasitize only one or two other species of insects, and almost every other insect has an associated parasitoid wasp. And that's just scratching the surface of wasps that live right here in New Jersey. So wasps are a huge group. Even bees and ants, often depicted as unrelated insects, are both just specialized types of wasps. But I don't say that to alarm you. Though we are surrounded by wasps in our daily lives, the vast majority of wasps cannot sting. Stinging wasps have an organ aptly called the stinger. The stinger is a modified part of the female's reproductive system, which was modified to inject venom instead of eggs. Because of the way it evolved, only female wasps can sting. The males, though almost identical to the females in appearance and number, simply can't. All stinging wasps are descended from a single common ancestor, which lived over 120 million years after the first wasps. So non-stinging wasps had much more time to evolve and diversify. That's part of the reason there are so many more of them. As a side note, stinging wasps can still lay eggs, they just don't use their ovipositor to do it. And just to avoid confusion, bees and ants are taxonomically grouped within stinging wasps because they evolved from them. However, most ants have since lost the ability to sting. It's kind of like how whales are technically mammals, even though superficially they don't look or act much like the rest of the group. So out of all of these wasps that we discussed earlier, only a handful can actually sting. But many of the ones that can sting can really pack a punch. So let's talk about them. There are a few really important things to remember in order to reduce your risk of getting stung. I haven't been stung a single time since I started studying wasps up close years ago, so I know these tips work. And for the record, I did get stung before that. Still, wasps are wild animals, so and these tips are not magic, so interact with wasps at your own risk. If you find yourself next to a wasp nest, stay calm, breathe slowly, and move slowly. Wasps are attuned to sense rapid movements and carbon dioxide, so if you minimize these, you minimize your risk. Again, stay calm, breathe slowly, and move slowly. If you disturb a nest, or if you are stung near a nest, stay calm, move quickly, away from the nest, and alert others. Try to avoid flailing your arms. Erratic movements will increase the likelihood that you will be stung additional times. Also make sure to alert other people in the area of the danger so no one else is hurt. Again, stay calm, move quickly, and alert others. Wasps usually only try to sting people when defending their nest or if they are physically harassed, such as being squeezed or swatted. Foraging wasps are rarely aggressive. A single wasp typically won't try to hurt you on purpose. To avoid accidental stings, you should wear closed-toed shoes while outdoors. Now, unfortunately, wasps don't understand things like outdoor markets and picnics. They smell the food and fly in to eat it, and then they get frightened by the big animals, us, trying to hurt them. The best way to prevent wasps from panicking is to avoid attracting them to begin with. Many species of social wasps are attracted to meat, rotting fruit, and sugary fluids, such as sauces, juices, and soft drinks. When outdoors, make sure to properly cover food and drinks, and dispose of waste in an appropriately covered bin or container so that the wasps won't be able to smell the food from as far away. And with that, it's time for another pop quiz. What is the most important predator in all terrestrial environments? Is it A, birds of prey, B, bears, C, snakes, or D, foxes? Does everybody have an answer? Okay, the answer is, just kidding, it's wasps. Of course it's wasps, especially parasitoid wasps, ants, and social wasps. By biomass, wasps are the most important predators in all terrestrial ecosystems, just above spiders. Honestly, you should have seen this coming. So because it is my specific area of study, let's take a look at how just social wasps fit into the food web. At the bottom of the food chain, we have crops and native plants, at least for the purposes of this diagram, which are eaten by insects that we usually think of as pests. Social wasps are so important because they are generalists. They hunt all of these different pest insects, and in doing so, help protect the plants that we rely on. They are especially effective predators of harmful caterpillars. Social wasps, in turn, are hunted by a wide array of larger animals. They are an important food source for many songbirds and lizards. Perhaps more surprisingly, however, is their importance to mammals that hibernate. Wasp larvae and pupae, which are protected within a wasp nest, are a vital food source for bears, skunks, raccoons, opossums, and coyotes, especially in autumn. These mammals eagerly brave hundreds of angry wasps to feast on their young in order to store up on fat and protein for the long winter ahead. Large mammals are a big threat to wasp nests. So social wasps have evolved defensive behaviors that specifically target large mammals. Unfortunately, we are large mammals. So that's why they cause us so many problems. They evolved to defend their young from predators that, to them, look just like us. So to recap, let's look at an example of how wasps affect the broader ecosystem. When wasp populations plummet, pest populations surge. Too many pests can kill or stress their host plants, which isn't good for anybody. Conversely, when wasp populations are healthy, pest populations are kept in check, and the plants that they feed on are able to thrive. This is especially important along the banks of streams and rivers within our watersheds. Plants stabilize the banks to prevent flooding and erosion. Without wasps patrolling for prey along the waterway, these plants wouldn't stand a chance against herbivorous insects. Now, all of this is not to say that caterpillars are categorically bad, of course. Caterpillars and other plant pests are good for the environment in moderation. They help regulate plant growth and habitat in ways that benefit the entire ecosystem. The important takeaway here is that everything in nature exists in a balance, and wasps are critical to maintaining that balance. Now, let's talk about pollination. Again, because it is my area of study, let's focus in on just social wasps. Social wasps are abundant. They visit many flowers to drink nectar, which makes them important pollinators. The fuzzier wasps tend to be more efficient pollinators than the smoother ones because pollen sticks to them better, but they are all essential. Many native flowers in North America evolved specifically for social wasp pollination, including asters, goldenrods, many cacti, mints, jewelweed, and milkweed. In temperate regions, many of those plants time the emergence of their flowers with the peak of wasp colony development in the fall, although some coordinate their flowers with the emergence of new queens in the spring instead. In North America, social wasps are also important pollinators of numerous food crops, such as carrots, parsnips, celery, and sunflowers, as well as many spices, such as oregano, basil, peppermint, spearmint, lavender, fennel, dill, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Excuse me, not sure what that was. Okay. All right, so now time permitting, I would like to walk you through the top 10 most common social wasps in New Jersey to give you some familiarity with the wasps in our area. If these illustrations look familiar, it's because I have shamelessly stolen all of them from my book. All right, so without further ado, let's dive on in. Number 10 is the common aerial yellow jacket, so named because it typically constructs paper nests high in tree branches. It is common in forest habitat throughout the US and Canada. Each of these illustrations is split down the middle to show the extremes of its color pattern. M stands for melanic, or more black, and X stands for xanthic, or more yellow, and so on. The symbols next to each illustration represent queens, workers, and males, respectively. Number 9 is the German yellow jacket, an invasive species from Europe. It was accidentally introduced to Montreal in the 1960s, probably via a nest in a shipping container. And its range has expanded substantially since then, especially over the last 20 years. The German yellow jacket is now found on every continent except Antarctica. Number 8 is the redcoat paper wasp. Paper wasps construct relatively small umbrella-shaped nests in semi-sheltered locations. So you've probably found them around somewhere at some point, just sort of shaped like an upside-down bowl. Number 7 is the coral paper wasp, so called because its color pattern superficially resembles that of a coral snake, with red touching yellow. The range of the species is expanding northwards due to climate change. It was once found as far north as South Jersey, but it can now be found throughout the state. Number 6 is the southern yellow jackets. So most yellow jackets nests are annual, which means they only last for 1 year. However, nests south of Tennessee can become perennial when they are used year-round by the same family of wasps. The largest perennial yellow jacket nest ever recorded belonged to the species and measured a staggering 9 feet tall. It should be noted that a nest that large is exceedingly rare, and annual yellow jacket nests rarely get larger than a pumpkin. Number 5 is the European paper wasp, another invasive species from Europe. It was accidentally introduced to Massachusetts in the 1970s. It has since become a major pest species and one of the most abundant wasps on the continent. Number 4 is the eastern yellow jacket. Like many yellow jackets, this species builds paper nests in abandoned rodent burrows underground. Number 3 is the European hornet, which is one of the largest wasps on the continent. It is, you guessed it, yet another invasive species from Europe. It was accidentally introduced to New York in the 1850s, and it is now well established across most of the eastern US. This species is often attracted to porch lights at night. Number 2 is the imposter paper wasp, so called because it mimics so many other species of wasps. This illustration is one of its color forms, but to really get an appreciation for how variable this species is, here are many more. Remember, this is all one species. All right, let's move on to the number 1 most common species of social wasp in New Jersey, the bald-faced hornet. These wasps are called hornets because of their large size, but they are technically yellow jackets. Like the common aerial yellow jacket, this species builds large paper nests high in trees. The nests are easiest to spot in winter, but the wasps themselves are long gone by then. Only the queens hibernate through the winter in loose soil or rotten logs. The rest of the colony dies in the fall. This is true of all social wasps in New Jersey. So, biodiversity is great, obviously. It reinforces our ecosystems and allows human activities to exist. So let's talk about some of the threats that biodiversity is facing in our region of New Jersey. First, invasive species. A species is considered invasive in a region if it outcompetes other organisms in its environment and its population explodes. Most species that become invasive have been introduced by humans, accidentally or otherwise, since introduced organisms usually have no natural predators or parasites in the new region, so that allows them to become invasive much easier. Invasive species at any level of the food web can disrupt the whole. Invasive plants can crowd out other species and alter habitats. Invasive herbivores can decimate plant populations. Invasive predators can wipe out prey species, and invasive parasites and diseases can cause local extinctions in worst case scenario. Any one of these can have wide-reaching effects on the entire ecosystem, often resulting in millions of dollars worth of economic damage, not specific to our region, but as a whole. So the emerald ash borer, the spotted lanternfly, stiltgrass, multiflora rose, bamboo, autumn olive, and barberry are all great examples of invasive species in our area. Next, habitat loss. So habitat loss is one of the leading causes of species extinctions in North America. Habitat is lost primarily through human activities, especially agriculture, development, and the mining and harvesting of natural resources. The extent of the damage on the whole is enormous. About 30% of temperate forests in North America have been destroyed. Less than 1% of historic prairie habitats remain. And between 1955 and 1970, the United States lost wetland habitat equivalent to about twice the land area of New Jersey. And wetlands remain one of the habitats most vulnerable to ongoing destruction. So most natural habitat in North America was lost due to colonization and agriculture prior to the 20th century, followed by the intensive development of the 20th century. However, that doesn't mean it is no longer an issue today. Quite the contrary. The less natural habitat we have left, the more fragile our remaining ecosystems become. We must protect what remains. So much of modern habitat loss in North America is driven by small-scale development. A wetland is drained to build suburban housing, or a right-of-way is bulldozed through a delicate forest ecosystem to make way for a pipeline. Those losses are localized, but their effects accumulate quickly. I have a photo of the Penn East victory on the slide because it's a great example of how our local community has already come together to prevent further habitat loss. And that moves us nicely into what we can do about it. The best way to combat habitat loss is to prevent it from happening in the first place. But if that is not an option, or if it's already happened, habitat restoration, though much more difficult, is the next best thing. Habitat restoration is the process of rebuilding and maintaining native habitat. It is something that can be done on a large scale or in your own backyard. Plants are the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems. So one of the best ways to restore natural habitat is to plant native species and remove non-native invasive ones. And that can include reducing the size of your lawn. If you enjoy gardening, many plant catalogs highlight native species. Local nonprofit environmental organizations, the Watershed Institute, can provide useful information about native plants and suppliers. If you want to take a more laissez-faire approach, though, just let wildflowers grow naturally around the edges of your property. They are attractive and they provide a critical food source for local wildlife. Rotting logs and fallen leaves create microhabitats for thousands of species of fungi and arthropods, including hibernating wasps. As plant matter decomposes, it also provides nutrients for new plants. So whenever possible, you should let leaves and logs remain on the ground. You can also volunteer at local parks and preserves to restore native habitat on a larger scale. Working with others towards a shared goal of habitat restoration can be a great opportunity to build community and meet new people. Next up, insecticides. Please try to reduce your use of general insecticides. Most, but not all, insecticides target all insects, beneficial species, and pests alike. If they are overused, all of the insects in and around the sprayed area will die off. And then when the pesticide eventually dissipates, the hardier pest species will come back in even greater numbers because there aren't any beneficial species left to compete with. So unless carefully applied and controlled, general insecticides are a lose-lose for homeowners in the long term. With less biodiversity and more pests in our backyards. So again, if you use them, please do your research and be careful. Now, this last one might seem out of place at first glance, but please bear with me. In our region of New Jersey, one of the largest sources of habitat loss is suburban housing development. Anyone who's lived here for long enough can name a dozen new cul-de-sacs in places that used to be farmland and forest. Now, I won't pretend like this is a simple issue because it absolutely is not. But I know an awful lot of people, especially people my age, who would love to live within walking distance of a grocery store if that was an option. More access to affordable multi-family housing in towns like Flemington and Lambertville would reduce demand for low-density suburban housing projects, and it would slow the pace of development deeper and deeper into our forests. Again, there are a lot of other factors at play here, and I don't claim to be a policy expert, but if we are serious about addressing habitat loss in our neighborhoods, we need to look at why it's happening and what we can do about it. For our final topic of tonight, let's talk about engineering. Now, this might come as a bit of a surprise, but I actually started my career in engineering and not insect science. When I told people that I wanted to do both, I was frequently met with blank stares and bewilderment. Why on earth would a girl want to study two totally unrelated fields, right? What is the point? Well, I want to quickly share a story about why studying biological systems, and insects especially, has everything to do with engineering and has the potential to revolutionize all sorts of technologies that we take for granted. I want to introduce you to the Arctic yellowjacket, Dolichovespula albida. The Arctic yellowjacket makes its home in the boreal forest and inhospitable tundra of the American Arctic. When I first learned about this species, I was struck by its ability to thrive in such an extreme environment. How could such a small wasp insulate a paper nest that was built inside of pockets of permafrost from the Arctic summer? How could they keep their larvae from freezing? The wasp paper itself wasn't a very good insulator, so it wasn't that. But then I started to realize something. The layers of paper around the nest were always spaced the same distance apart. Now, when engineers think about insulation, we usually think about materials and composites. But these wasp nests proved that internal geometry of insulation is just as important as its material properties. The nest was insulated, it was just a kind of insulation that was completely unknown to science. So naturally, I had to pursue this idea. Between myself and a few friends from college, we were able to build our own thermal testing equipment. Then we ran dozens of experiments, first with cut up cereal boxes and later with professional HVAC materials, until we came up with a prototype that is just as good as the best fiberglass in the market with none of the downsides. Better insulation means less energy use associated with heating and cooling buildings, which means our product has the potential to significantly reduce carbon emissions. In honor of our, in honor of our original inspiration, we named our insulation Yellowjacket. Now, unfortunately, Yellowjacket insulation is not yet commercially available. We are still working to improve our manufacturing process prior to product launch because I am currently making each vat of insulation by hand with standard office equipment in my bedroom, which is not ideal. To that end, we are in the process of applying for a grant from the National Science Foundation so that we can build a robot to significantly improve that process. It's all very exciting stuff. So the next time someone tries to tell you that wasps don't serve a purpose, just know that I, for one, have reason to disagree. Thank you so much for joining me tonight to talk about a rather unusual topic. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We have time now for some Q&A, so I will turn the microphone back over to Olivia.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was an amazing presentation. I feel like every other slide, you know, I was just going like, wow, with my eyes to things that I didn't know. So there aren't many questions right now, but I'm hoping some people ask more, or I'll try to think of some. So the one question we have so far is, which native obligate plants are the most species? Okay, let's see. I'll just read what it says and let's see if we can figure out which native obligate plants are the most species specific for at-risk wasps in New Jersey. So I guess they're asking, you know, what native plants should we have to help at-risk wasps?
That is an excellent question. I don't have the answer readily available to me, unfortunately, but I can say that goldenrod is definitely one of them. It is primarily pollinated by wasps and serves as a really important food source, especially during later in the season.
Let's see. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, um, just your experience in engineering or entomology? If you wanted to tell anyone about how you got into entomology, because I believe it wasn't necessarily through like a degree, it was helping through iNaturalist. So would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I am not formally trained in entomology. I started out, again, like I said before, in engineering. I took a manufacturing job in engineering after college. It wasn't really fulfilling me in the way that I wanted it to. So it started as a hobby of me doing research about insects. And I decided on a whim that I wanted to make a field guide, and I chose wasps because I was curious about them. So with the help and patience and guidance of other experts in the field, I am proud to now count myself among them. It was, thousands of hours of research that went into this book. I mean, it is the most complete book about wasps to date for this particular group. Did you have
That's
any
awesome.
specific questions about any of that?
No, something I was thinking about though that I thought was interesting was one, it's crazy how your book has, I think it's what, over 900 species, and just how each wasp you showed like the variation in the
Mhm.
coloration. I guess I thought maybe that it's interesting that most of the wasps have like exactly the same markings versus like cows or dogs that have like different markings.
Yeah,
So how did you do the research to be able to say like this is what the most melanated or the least melanated is?
that's a really great question. So I actually have a copy of the book here if anybody was curious. Um, so what Olivia is talking about, and I showed that a little bit before, um, but for each of these illustrations, I don't know if it's going to be able to
I
show.
think you have to take your
Okay, well,
the
imagine it.
blurb.
Let me try to figure out how to do that quick. There we go. Okay, so each of these illustrations is split down the middle, like I said before, that shows the different extremes of the color forms. So most of the research that I used to make those determinations and make those paintings was done through community science platforms like iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is this big community science platform where anybody in the world can submit photographs of anything that they see outdoors. And I use it primarily as a researcher, and I look through, thousands and thousands of these different observations, and I record, okay, what coloration is this one, and where is it located? And does that have an impact? Is its coloration because of different mimicry in the location, or is it its own thing? There's a ton of complexity and it's super fascinating. But the short answer is, yeah, I used community science in order to get that data.
That's really amazing, and also shows the importance of community science. There are only so many people who work at like universities or colleges, so putting all these things together is how we can learn new things about the environment. So
Absolutely. It is the cutting edge of science right now.
yeah, and definitely anyone who has a smartphone, iNaturalist, it's great for when you're just walking around and you're curious about what something is called and you don't have a naturalist right next to you to ask. So a couple more questions have come in. Um, Tina asked, why is nectar from fall blooming native plants important for wasps?
That is an excellent question. So nectar in the fall for wasps is especially important because that is the height of colony development. So at least at our latitude, where New Jersey is, and in our climate, like I sort of alluded to in the presentation, only the queens will survive the winter. So they have to start a new colony from scratch every spring. So over the course of the year, during the warm months, the colony grows and grows and grows as she lays more eggs and they become workers for the colony. And then in the fall is where that peak is, where there's the most wasps. And how the colony does at that point in time determines how well they are able to produce new queens and males for the next season. So that's why those flowers are so important. And it also makes sense why they evolved the way they did, to target so many insects at the same time, because there's just that huge potential for pollination. And then right after that, the colony declines very rapidly through October, November. And all of the wasps are either fall prey to predators or they starve or freeze. So.
Awesome. Another person asked, could you talk more about the temperature in the various paper nests that you were mentioning?
Yeah, sure. So the adult, let me actually just go back to that slide if I can. So the adults of Dolichovespula albida, the Arctic yellow jacket, they, or the queens at least, they can survive being frozen in the ground. But the larvae can't. If they get frozen, they die. So if the temperature drops below freezing point, the colony is non-viable. So what these wasps have evolved to do is create this ingenious kind of insulation around their nests that's made of layers of different, just different layers of paper that trap air pockets inside. And that keeps the inside of the nest temperature regulated. And the wasps can regulate temperature by vibrating their bodies and their wings, sort of doing a little dance, or they can, if it gets too hot, they can take a drop of water in their mouth and walk to the entrance to the colony and just let it evaporate, and it becomes sort of like a natural air conditioner. So it's really amazing the level of thermal engineering that wasps are capable of.
Yeah, that is really cool, and giving us a little engineering physics lesson too in this talk about biology or about insects. So let's see, another so now we have a couple that are more specific to people's homes or things that they have observed. So one person says, a couple years ago, I observed for the first time on our property a very large yellow-faced hornet repeatedly attacking and eating honeybees in our gardens. It was startling, and a search found the most similar photo labeled as an English hornet. To me, it seemed an invasive species. Should I protect the honeybees or ignore this?
That's a great question. So this is definitely the wasp that you saw. There's really nothing else that looks like this in our area. English wasp is another name for Vespa crabrosaxonica, I believe. It's something like that. But anyway, it's a subspecies of Vespa crabro, which is the European hornet. So they will occasionally go after bees. The bees have some defenses against them, but the Western honeybees are less adapted than the Eastern ones to hornets. It's a whole thing, but I would try to take measures to try to protect that hive. This is an invasive species and they do cause problems.
Yeah, definitely. Another one related to homeowner, I have wasps that like to build nests between my storm windows and inner windows. I usually leave them alone since it's only a few. They're also wondering if they might be invasive, but do you have any suggestions on how to prevent them from doing this?
That's a great question too. So Yeah, what you're seeing is a lot of paper wasps. So there's a couple of different paper wasps in this presentation. They all like eaves and the inside of storm windows to nest in. So it depends. Some of them, most of them, in fact, are native, but we do have a couple of very problematic invasive species as well, like this one. So if you see them, they're very yellow, it's probably the invasive one. Now they probably won't harm you unless you're actively doing maintenance around those storm windows, excuse me. So it's probably safe to leave them as is. But if you wanted to get rid of them or prevent them from nesting, you could either seal the area, which may not be the best option given your circumstances, or let's see. That's the best advice that I can give. Despite all of my expertise in wasps, I am not a pest removal expert. So I recommend if you really want to get rid of these, you really should talk to a professional.
Yeah, good advice. And I guess that would also kind of answer someone asked the best way to keep wasps from nesting in their attic. Would be
if they're nesting in
make...
your attic, then there's ways for them to get in. So, yeah.
Let's see. One person asked, why are wasps attracted to meat and human foods? What do they get out of these?
That's another great question. So there are actually only a couple of types of wasps that will go after meat and also other human foods. And they're the ones that just overall give us the most problems, which are the yellow jackets. So yellow jackets will go after vertebrate meat, including, our food, because their larvae can digest it. So a little known fact is actually that adult wasps cannot eat meat or any solid foods because their waists are too small and they can't digest it. So instead, what they do is they will collect that meat and bring it back to the larvae in their nest. The larvae can digest it just fine because they have a different anatomy before they pupate. So that's why some species go after meat. A lot of different types of insects, including a lot of adult wasps, will also go after, the sweet foods. That's because in the wild, they would be going after nectar or like tree sap or fruit or that sort of thing, where they would be able to get nutrients that don't require solid digestion. So they are naturally attracted to sugary fluids.
That's really interesting. And now that I'm looking at how wasps are shaped, that is crazy that their waists are so small.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
They have to live on a liquid diet forever as an adult.
It's arguably better than being a larvae in terms of digestion because the larvae don't have a butt.
So they just all become, it all becomes the larva, all the food they eat.
They grow a butt just before pupation, and then they do their business. But yeah, insect anatomy is absurd.
The more you know. I guess the final question. Oh wait, it looks like we might have a couple more.
Yeah, keep them coming.
So I think this was going back to a previous question that you said, this person said, regarding the European hornets eating the honeybees, can you tell again why this is a problem, given that honeybees are also non-native as well? And this is assuming the bees in questions don't belong to a local beekeeper.
Okay, I was operating under the assumption that they did belong to somebody. If they don't belong to anybody, then yeah, it's fine. As you pointed out, honeybees are not native to North America, and they are damaging because they are an invasive species. They're important for us because a lot of our agriculture relies on them, but in terms of ecology, we don't love them. So it's a give and take. If the nest doesn't belong to anybody, then it's totally fine.
Awesome. So was it, that just made me think before, so natively in like this area, was it the wasps that were doing all of the pollination, or was there like a native bee species that was filling the niche that the like European honeybees are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before the arrival of European honeybees, there were already thousands of species of bees present in North America, as well as most of these wasps that we've been talking about. So yeah, between all of them, the plants of the area specialized in order to be pollinated by those species. So an interesting thing about honeybees is that they preferentially pollinate other invasive plants. So like other plants that were imported from Europe, because they evolved to pollinate those, they prefer them when they're here, and that can cause unintended consequences when you're thinking about the propagation of non-native species in our area. Again, that doesn't mean that honeybees are 100% bad or 100% good. It's ecology. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, definitely. That's also something I didn't think about, was the connection between their native our invasive species, like bee is going to prefer our invasive species plants. That's because it's native. It's just all about perspective.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
them.
exactly.
The final question, let's see. Someone said they enjoyed the elaboration of the honeybee European hornet question. Um, so why are wasps so aggressive in the late fall?
Excellent
Is
question.
yeah.
So this is a bit of a long answer, so please bear with me. But imagine a small town versus a large city, and think about which would be more heavily defended. In terms of wasps, if you have a small nest, you have less to lose, so they're more likely to just flee. Versus if they have a large nest, they have a lot more to lose. So they're going to be more aggressively defended. So if you go anywhere near a large nest, it's much more likely that you'll be stung than if you go near a small nest. And that's a really good rule of thumb if you're going out and intentionally looking for wasps. If you see a nest about the size of your fist, it's safe to about 3 feet. But if it's larger than that, you need to give it more space. So that's sort of the reason that it's more likely that you'll be stung during the late fall, because that's when the colonies are the largest. And that is also applicable to the foragers. When they go out on their own, they're just more aggressive. So yeah, something to keep in mind.
Great advice. So another person, if no one puts any more questions in, this will be our final question, but one that I think will be interesting to end on is, are you thinking that your yellow jacket inspired insulation could also be used for things like tents, clothing, vehicles, buildings, even coffee cups? Do you think there are ways to bring entomology and engineering together in different ways?
Potentially, this is still a very new technology, so we don't know the full scope of what we're going to be able to do with it. However, the insulation that we're developing is intended for use in buildings. So the way you have fiberglass in a wall, you could have this in your wall just as easily, once we get it to market. Coffee cups is interesting. I think we could do something with that. It would be tricky, but it could work. That's not currently in scope, but we'll see.
Looks like no more questions have come in, but Thank you again so much for a really excited, enthusiastic presentation where I think everyone, mouth was open, learning new things. Again, we will have some copies of Alice Kratzer's book in the Watershed Institute's Nature Center for purchase pretty soon. So if you're interested, you can purchase them there. Check out the website that you mentioned, owlfly.com.org.
Owlflyllc.com. That's OWLLC. Nope, sorry. Let me start over. OWLFLYLLC.com.
Awesome. So yeah, if you're interested to learn more about these things, check that out. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Hope to see you at our next Watershed Wednesday and have a great night.